Good afternoon. Today is February 1st, 2022. Welcome to the Ways and Means bill hearings for the afternoon. We will begin with House Bill 302 with Delegate Dana Stein, and it is sponsor only. Good afternoon, Delegate Stein, and whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Great, thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. This is a local bill. It would authorize Baltimore County to set up a hardship exception under the homeowners property tax credit program. The county delegation just heard the bill this past Friday, so hasn't had a chance to vote on it yet. So as you know, under the homeowners property tax credit program, if a homeowner earns less than $60,000, they can get credits against their property tax bill each year. And the reason for this bill is that last year I heard from two members of Baltimore County's Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board about homeowners who have endured significant hardship but are denied the tax credit because their gross income went over $60,000. In some of these situations, the homeowner had to withdraw money from an IRA or a 401k to pay for their medical expenses or those of a family member, only to realize later that these funds counted toward their gross income and made them ineligible for the homeowner credit. So in other words, the money that they took out of their savings or their retirement fund to pay for medical expenses count as income for purposes of the property tax credits. And so they were denied the credit, whereas in previous years, they have been granted it. And many of these affected homeowners are senior citizens. So what this bill does is it would authorize Baltimore County to set up a hardship exception for a homeowner whose income goes above $60,000 if the homeowner suffers a hardship, such as an illness, accident, or property casualty event, and payment of these costs push them over the $60,000 cap in income. The homeowner would have to document the hardship and the related expenses. And all this would have to be approved by the Baltimore County Council, which would then establish the parameters for the hardship exception. The bill is supported by County Executive Oshevsky, the Reynoldstown branch of the NAACP, and AARP. And Karen Hofberger, who's a former member of the County Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board, has submitted written testimony. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Carr, and then Delegate Lisanti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Stein. This sounds like a great local bill. As I was reading through it, I don't believe that there's any specifications about how much beyond the current $60,000 income cap the county would have discretion on. Can you speak to that issue? And if that's your intention, perhaps to have some limits in terms of how high the county could go?
That's a good question. It's not something that I considered. I thought that would be within the discretion of the Baltimore County Council when it decides, if this bill were to pass, whether it wanted to approve a hardship exception, how high the income would go. Certainly any increase in income would have to be the result of these hardship expenses. But I'd certainly be happy to consider something that establishes a cap on how high the council could go in authorizing this.
Thank you.
Delegate Lisanti.
Just a quick question. Delegate Stein, thank you very much for bringing this issue to our attention. My question is, it's enabling legislation for Baltimore County. I'm sure that this problem exists in other jurisdictions. Why wouldn't you do it as a statewide bill since it's enabling?
Yeah, last year, actually, I did have a statewide bill, which wasn't enabling, but required it. And so given the fact that the fiscal cost for that was pretty high, I decided to sort of pare it back to and just focus on Baltimore County. But if this was successful, certainly happy to
expand the authority.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thanks.
Delegate Stein. Seeing none, thank you, Delegate Stein. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 302. Moving on to House Bill 212, Delegate Parrott, and this is just one witness, Delegate Parrott. So whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee, for having me this afternoon. I appreciate it. I do have a PowerPoint if we can turn that on. The share screen function is turned off right now.
send that to the committee, Delegate?
We did not. Well, we called earlier today.
Okay, because we
We
generally
don't have a
don't-
PowerPoint.
Okay, we generally send PowerPoints out to the committee. We don't have them during the actual hearing, but we send them out ahead of time.
Is there a way to share the screen? And then I can follow up and email it to the committee?
Ellie, can you share the screen with Delegate Parrott?
Thanks, Madam Chair.
You should be able to share your screen now.
Very good. Thank you. Let's see. Can everybody see the PowerPoint then?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. All right. So this bill is signature verification of absentee ballots and absentee ballot applications. Of course, in the last election, there were a lot of absentee ballots that occurred, and especially in the primaries where we actually mailed absentee ballots to every voter. But we weren't really checking to see if the signatures on those absentee ballots match. So for instance, if they sent a ballot to someone who had moved, maybe it was a vacant house or an old renter, there was no check if they mailed it back that it was actually the person who was voting. These are just a couple quotes, like from the NCSL. Election officials can verify the signature, but when combined with an effective cure process or an opportunity for a voter to fix a mismatched or missing signature, signature verification is an effective way to verify the voter's identity. And we can all just figure that out. That's just logical. Right now, of course, there's no process in Maryland to compare signatures to voter registration forms, but we're in the vast minority here. 32 states and the District of Columbia require election officials to compare signatures on absentee ballots. We're one of only 18 states that do not verify the identity of voters on mail-in ballots. We're way behind the times here. It's really time to upgrade our processes. As you look across the country, you can see those are the 18 states in white, but the blue states are the ones that are validating these signatures. And you can see that on the top screen there. It's interesting because it's not hard. It's not like we're having someone, a signature validation expert, sit there and compare every signature. It's all computerized, and it's been happening in the banking industry for over 15 years. So all of our checks right now, they validate whether it's us or not when we sign those checks. And this, of course, the states with automated signature verification use different types of software, which are compatible with the Panasonic scanners that a lot of us have. So it's very easy for us to be able to do it. I actually believe that the fiscal note, if you took a look at it, it's way too high compared to when we look at other states. The software is already available. Basically, it's a two-step process, what this bill proposes. The first step is they check the signatures of the absentee ballot when it comes in. That's the absentee ballot request form. And then if it matches, of course, we'll mail them the absentee ballot, and then we would mail them their ballot. And of course, we could also verify the actual ballot itself. Now, also, we can use actual driver's license numbers without having the signature. That's already processed that Maryland has, and that's pretty foolproof. So that would remain under this bill. Of course, this is the second step where we actually validate the actual ballots themselves. There are a lot of benefits for having this. It would help ensure the integrity of our election process, make sure that we have confidence in our voters. With questionable ballots, it would alert the voter to make sure that they're still able to vote. We don't want anyone not being able to vote, but everybody to be able to vote and be able to vote once. With that, I just encourage a yes vote on House Bill 212.
Are there any questions from the committee? I also should let you know that Jared Demaritis is here from the Board of Elections. Should you have any questions from him as well? Delegate Griffith. You're on mute.
For the love of God.
That was a good question, too. I was sure.
Yeah, thank you, Deli, for bringing this forward, and certainly informative for me. Are you able to bring back up that screen share? So I was just curious, and I was absorbed when you went through it, the number of states that already have this in place. Which states? Was it California and Washington and Oregon?
That's correct. California has it. Washington State has it. Oregon has it. Yeah, I mean, even with Democrat and Republican states, we're in the vast minority by not checking signature validation.
Well, listen, I think there's no question that California has the most progressive voting laws in the country, and I certainly hope Maryland can be just as progressive as California. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will send that PowerPoint out to everyone so that you would have it.
Are there any other questions on House Bill 212? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 212. And just for anyone in the public who is listening or any other members, it's the policy of the committee. Please send any information you would like to share with the committee to the committee ahead of time, and we'll make sure to disseminate it. We do not, unless it's a briefing, allow screen sharing. I also see Mary Wagner here from the State Board to answer questions as well. Moving on to House Bill 215, Delegate Parrott, and there are two witnesses. So Delegate Parrott, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could share the screen again, I have a PowerPoint for this one as well.
Go today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just waiting to be allowed to do that. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Thank you, Chair and Committee. It's great to be with you this afternoon again. This is House Bill 215, Personal Property Tax Depreciation of Assessed Value. For those of you who have a business, you know that the personal property tax, you have to fill it out one way for the state of Maryland and another way for the federal government. And if you hire an accountant, that's probably pretty easy. I'm sure they've got different programs that make it easy. But for smaller businesses, this is very difficult to have two very different processes. And of course, you could have old printers, old scanners, fax machines even. And if you don't get rid of them in the state of Maryland, we're going to tax that as long as you have it on your rolls. So it can never be fully depreciated, even if it's a real piece of junk just sitting in the corner. What this really does is encourage people to get rid of things and buy new equipment, which I don't think that's really the design that we'd like to see happen. Currently, office personal equipment depreciates at a rate of about 20% annum for that type of equipment, with the minimum assessment is 25% of the original cost. So you're always going to retain that 25% ownership number. So the current personal property tax rates per county in Maryland, it is a county tax, and you can see the different counties. Some of them don't have a personal property tax, like Frederick, Garrett, Kent, and Queen Anne, so they don't really have to worry about this too much. But the rest of us, I'm in Washington County, we have 2.37% is our tax rate on the personal property tax. And so it matters whether it's fully depreciated or not. And so if we look at the different depreciation rates in Maryland, so remember, this is all the equipment that a business owns, and they're depreciating it over time. So you've got different categories, A through G. You can see that 10% each year is category A, but at 25%, that's where it stops. You can never depreciate a category A below 25%. And you can look down even for boats. And the very last one, it's a slower number, 5% decrease each year, but it always maintains that 25% of its value the way things are currently. Property tax, this is just an example of $1,000 over 10 years. We're just comparing now the federal rate to the state rate, and it's very different. The federal rate actually takes much longer to depreciate, 11 years to get to zero depreciated value, whereas Maryland, it goes down pretty quickly, but at year 4, it just stays at that 25% value all the way through. And if you kept it for 20 or 30 years, if you didn't clear it off your books, it would stay at $250 of value. So this bill would allow personal property in Maryland to depreciate all the way to zero. The personal property would follow the federal rate rather than just the state rate. Of course, this would help put money back in businesses' pocket, which really goes out then to their business employees. And it reduces paperwork, confusion for businesses. It's very, very helpful, especially for small businesses who have to have two very different depreciation schedules. And I would encourage a positive vote for House Bill 215. Before I stop, I do want to say there is an amendment that we're going to give to you that would give you an option. This bill says we're going to follow the federal rate, which allows depreciation to zero. The amendment would say that we would follow the state rate still. I don't like this as much because we're not simplifying it. However, following the state rate and allowing property to go down to zero would be the amendment. So thank you, Madam Chair and Committee, and I hope we can vote yes for this and make some changes that would help small businesses.
Delegate Hornberger with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill to the committee. This is something that the committee's looked at over the last few years with the ability to tax personal property, something that's already been purchased and had tax paid on it. My question for you or one of the members of the staff is it permissible for a business to depreciate at a different rate federally than they are with the state? Because I know that the Fed has made a lot of changes on depreciation. And maybe that's a question for the comptroller. Is there a penalty or is it permissible to depreciate at different rates versus your state and federal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know as a small business owner myself, I'm a traffic engineering consultant. I do these each year. And so the way I understand it is that I have to follow a certain rate for the federal. I could go slower than that rate, but I can't accelerate that rate. But then the state is the same thing. And it's very, very different. So I have two totally different spreadsheets for each of the equipment that the company owns. And it is a real pain.
Yep. So, what I want to shy away from here is creating an unknown liability for taxpayers who are trying to do the right thing, but somehow implicate themselves using different schedules. But thank you.
Thank you.
And next, I actually should have called Kevin Kinnelly for 2 minutes to testify unfavorable, and then we will circle back to questions. So I apologize, Mr. Kinnelly, you may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Kinnelly here in opposition to House Bill 215. As you've heard, the bill proposes a significant change to state and local tax policy. And unfortunately, there's no input here from all of the relevant stakeholders. And counties are certainly concerned that this bill will severely jeopardize local revenues and support for public schools, public safety, public health, transportation, and all the other essential services that our shared constituents rely on each and every day. As the fiscal note indicates, the federal depreciation schedule is nuanced, and SDAT indicates that they would need to hire more people and acquire new software to comply with the bill's requirements. And even then, it would take them 6 months to even be able to comply. We think that a bill like this should come with appropriate stakeholder input. Counties are always willing to engage in conversations about state and local tax policy, but we need to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table. And that way everyone can understand the actual effects of the changes contemplated by this bill. So for those reasons, Madam Chair, MACO respectfully requests an unfavorable report on House Bill 215.
Now, are there any questions for Mr. Kinnelly? Is that right, Kinnelly? Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 215. Moving on, is Vice Chair Crosby with us for House Bill 224? I see, okay. Vice Chair, whenever you're ready, you can begin on House Bill 224.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, Vice Chair, and distinguished members of the committee. For the record, Vice Chair Brian Crosby, and it's an honor to present House Bill 224, entitled Property Tax Exemption for Disabled Veterans. This bill exempts veterans with an 80% or higher service-related disability determined by the Veterans Administration from property taxes. Currently, only veterans with 100% disability rating are exempt from property taxes. Maryland is home to over 370,000 veterans, and over 30,000 of those have a disability rating of 70% or higher. Veterans with these ratings have a hard time working because of their injuries, and the financial burden and stress of owning and remaining in their home should not be something that our most deserving citizens have to struggle with. Based on these reasons, I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 224.
To testify unfavorably, we have Mr. Canali for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Once again, Kevin Canali here in opposition to this bill. I appreciate the bill sponsor. I've had conversations with the sponsor about this bill. And I'll say that, it's not so much that we don't want the ability to implement a piece of legislation like this one. And in fact, your committee has before it right now a bill that would authorize counties to do this. And we appreciate that approach. This one is just, again, it's really about fiscal issues for us, and we're concerned about the overall fiscal effects. But we certainly, again, would appreciate the ability to do something like this, and that way counties could decide whether or not to implement this at the local level with the proper local input and the ability to decide how much revenue they're willing to forego to offer the benefits provided by this bill. So again, appreciate the bill sponsor, and we'd ask that you please take the approach that you have before you in another bill that is authorizing counties to do this rather than mandating. And for those reasons, we'd ask for an unfavorable report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the bill sponsor or Mr. Canali? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 224. Moving on to House Bill 268, Delegate Henson, and we have 3 witnesses. And I don't see Delegate Henson. Haley or Sarah, do we have Delegate Henson with us?
She is not here yet. Lori talked to their office.
I will. Delegate Kaiser. I see you on here. Are you ready?
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we'll circle back to House Bill 268, and we will move on to House Bill 291 with Delegate Kaiser. Whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. It's so great to see everyone again, and great to see Stan. I would mention that Stan, Alistair, and all the analysts gave me socks. I'm wearing my Stan Ward socks today with his face plastered on my socks, if people can see them. It's hard to tell, but they're amazing. So George, all 3 of them, great socks. So
that's awesome.
I have 3 hearings in Ways and Means.
I can't unsee that now.
So 3 hearings in Ways and Means, and today's Stan socks. So anyway, I'm here on House Bill 291, not to show off my fantastic wardrobe. And this bill has 2 main components, but I'd first say, as I talk about it, that this bill passed the House and Senate unanimously last year, and there were some minor details that needed to be ironed out. So I'll just quickly run through. I think you have my written testimony. This would help with recount committees and how we do recounts. So let me just give you an example. Right now, a jurisdiction pays for a recount if it's less than 0.1% of a differential between the top 2 candidates. And in 2018 in Montgomery County, with nearly 75,000 votes cast, they differed by 77 votes only. And that was 2 votes, and their vote differential of 77 was 2 votes more than the threshold. And you might say, well, maybe 75 or 77 votes is not so close that maybe you don't need it. But again, it's like 0.11%. But even this Prince George's race, I say even more starkly, there was a county council race in 2014 with fewer than 5,000 votes, and the 2 candidates differed by 6 votes. And 6 votes did not trigger a recount, an automatic recount, nor would have 5. And so changing that threshold from 0.1 to 0.25 seems pretty obvious. And that just basically, it would have allowed in that race in Prince George's County for the recount threshold to hit at 10. So it's not a huge dramatic change in how many votes would cover. This bill also deals with publicly funded candidates. We in Montgomery County, and I know other counties have been doing it, when a candidate is publicly funded and then there's a recount, they have no money and no resources really to pay a lawyer and pay other people to be at the Board of Elections, to watch the voting, to question anything that's going on, and to allow them to create recount committees that would have all the same campaign financing rules. We developed these really closely with the State Board of Elections last year, along with Mr. Ward. So I always say that our democracy depends on free and fair election and the public's belief that the elections are free and fair. And I think that this bill is really designed to add to that confidence in elections. And I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Sure, for 2 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, this is Kathleen Boucher. I'm not sure what name you called.
I called your name, but I pronounced it wrong, so I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. Delegate Kaiser, of course, as usual, did an excellent job describing the bill. Montgomery County, I'm here on behalf of Montgomery County. I work with Montgomery County's Office of Intergovernmental Relations, and we'd like to support the bill. We're particularly grateful for the enabling authority that is in the bill that allows the county to use public funds to support publicly financed candidates in a recount situation. And again, I won't walk through the bill. We've submitted written testimony and would be grateful for a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Morgan Drayton for 2 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Morgan Drayton, Policy and Engagement Manager for Common Cause Maryland. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 291. And the sponsor did such a great job outlining the provisions. I'll try to keep my testimony short. So we know Maryland has a very well-developed system of campaign finance law, and that system ensures that everyday citizens can trace who's making donations and what special interest voices are being heard in that process. We believe that while recounts are a critical component in that democratic process, that process is very costly, and Marylanders should have clear info on how that process is being funded, which HB 291 will provide. Also, we're grateful for that enabling authority that will ensure that those candidates opting to run campaigns that are powered by small dollars are not left at a disadvantage in the event of a recount. So as our sponsor said, this legislation has passed in the House previously, and we hope it will do so again. Thank you, and we urge a favorable report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Kaiser or any of the other witnesses? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 291. Bye. Next, I'm going to recall House Bill 268. I understand Delegate Henson is here and she has 2 witnesses. So Delegate Henson, I see you. There you are. Whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Madam Chair, good afternoon, members of the Ways and Means Committee, and thank you for the second opportunity. I'm here to present House Bill 268. This is a bill that deals with Maryland's personal property tax, is what it's commonly referred to. Businesses in Maryland are assessed a tax against their personal property. By way of example, the personal property tax, the average bill in Anne Arundel County is $80. By way of example, the average tax bill in Montgomery County is $59. But the average cost to have a business's properties evaluated, to have their assets evaluated for depreciation and for the personal property tax assessment can cost upward of $500, $600 in professional accounting services. What this bill does is it doubles the exemption for personal property taxes for our businesses to allow more businesses to be exempt from having to go through the assessment process and having to pay the personal property tax. What the bill would do is to include thousands of new businesses in that exemption in the state of Maryland and open the opportunity for our businesses to remain compliant with the State Department of Assessment and Taxation and remove from the department's portfolio assessing these taxes for our small businesses that need support. Thank you for the opportunity to present this bill and to present a panel to testify in support of it. Appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Next, Ben Burge for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. First, I'm Ben Burge, President and CEO of the Anne Arundel Economic Development Corporation. I want to thank very much Delegate Henson for introducing this bill and for inviting me to come in support of it. And I would like to say that I won't rehash the bill. Delegate Henson did an excellent job of explaining it. I'd like to describe the impact very quickly. You can see it in my testimony. We issued about $31 million in grants during the pandemic. And what we found is our small business community in Anne Arundel County is predominantly owned by women and minority business owners. Approximately 70% self-identified as women and minority. This bill would help these small home-based businesses, of which a huge number are owned by women and minority business owners. As we know, the pandemic did not discriminate as to who it infected, but it did discriminate as to which businesses it impacted. Women and minority-owned businesses were disproportionately impacted. This bill helps those small businesses owned by primarily by those demographics and would help them get up off the ground and be sustainable. Thank you again, and on behalf of the board at AAEDC, we urge a favorable report on House Bill 268.
Thank you. Next, Kevin Canali for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 268. As always, you have my written testimony, and I echo the sentiments offered by the bill sponsor and Mr. Burge. And while this bill certainly carries a fiscal impact for counties, I think MACo understands the importance of delivering meaningful tax relief for small and home-based businesses amidst this pandemic-driven economic uncertainty. Because as the focus shifts to restoring our economy in a manner that is safe, equitable, and prosperous for all, counties are definitely eager and committed partners in promoting economic growth and opportunity. So I certainly appreciate the bill sponsor's willingness to work with us on this bill, and MACo prefers the tailored approach offered by House Bill 268. Counties recognize that small businesses contribute directly to the growth of local, state, and national economies, and expanding the local tax base and enabling counties to better provide core services for Maryland families and businesses. And with that, Madam Chair, MACo respectfully requests a favorable report on House Bill 268.
Thank you. I see a question by Delegate Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Henson. Just one quick question. How many small businesses would be impacted by this change? And I didn't see the fiscal note. My aide didn't bring it, but what's the fiscal note on this?
Thank you, Delegate Barnes, for the question. If you'll indulge me to find the fiscal note. I know that the numbers that we got from SDAT indicated they gave us a breakdown on the businesses per county that would be impacted by this. I don't see that breakdown in the fiscal note, but what it does say is that there would be a revenue loss to the counties specifically, but for the state, it would actually have a positive revenue impact because SDAT would take this out of their portfolio. They wouldn't be required to collect and assess this tax anymore. So it would give them the benefit of being able to shift personnel around to do other duties. As it relates to the impact to the counties, I can get back to you with the specific numbers for each county.
And what would the impact be to the state?
There wouldn't be any.
There would be no decrease in revenue to the state, as is what the fiscal note indicates.
Yeah, do we know what the increase to the state would be?
I don't have that information in front of me.
Madam Chair, if I can just help a little bit here. It doesn't affect the state at all because the state doesn't have a personal property tax. And then it'd be 14,000 businesses statewide. That's according to the fiscal note that'd be affected.
Okay, thank you. My last question, Mr. Canali, what would be the impact to the counties? Do you know?
Thank you, Delegate, for the question. I believe the fiscal note indicates about $1.5 million to counties for this bill.
Is that county-wide?
It's statewide, yes, for all counties.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, this question could be for the sponsor or for either of the witnesses. From a business's perspective, under this bill, how would things look different? Would it be that they sign a waiver or they simply just don't have to file if they're beneath the new cap of 20,000?
Would be a checkbox, Delegate, where they would check off an affidavit stating that they were underneath of the new cap.
Thank you.
Delegate Griffith.
unmute myself. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Henson, for this bill. I just want to let you know that I talked to a number of my businesses in my district about this bill, and all of them are very supportive and of this legislation. So thank you for putting this forward.
You delegate.
Questions for the bill sponsor or her witnesses? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 268. Thank you. Moving on to House Bill 285. Delegate Jones, and you have two witnesses. So whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Washington, and fellow members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Dana Jones. I come before you today to testify on a simple, enabling legislation to expand an already existing tax credit to disabled federal officers. Many counties in Maryland offer disabled state law enforcement officer and rescue worker a property tax credit. A majority of these individuals live on very fixed incomes due to their injuries, and the tax credit provides financial relief to them and their families. Currently, this benefit is only available to state agents. This bill, HB 285, would expand the benefit to disabled federal agents who are living in Maryland during their declaration as disabled or any time within 5 years prior. The bill includes Federal Job Series 0083, federal police officers or detectives for federal government agencies, which focuses on crime investigations. They're plainclothes investigators. And Series 1811s. They are criminal investigators for federal government agencies focusing on crime prevention, security supervision, and law enforcement work. These include federal officers from the U.S. Capitol Police, National Institute of Health, Park Police, Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, the FBI, USPS, the U.S. Mint, ATF, which is, as you know, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, the Supreme Court Police, Pentagon Police, and the CIA. These are to name just a few. Last year, we watched in horror as insurrectionists stormed the Capitol. The only thing that stopped these violent actors from reaching our elected officials and their staff was heroic actions taken by the Capitol Police officers and Metropolitan Police. Over 80 Capitol Police officers were injured during the riot, and over 150 officers in total from several local agencies became injured as a result of the attack. Unfortunately, under the current law, counties would not be allowed to extend this benefit to these brave men and women who fought to preserve our democracy on that dark day. I believe extending this property tax credit to disabled federal agents shows how we value the federal officers from Maryland, their families, and their dedication to our country. It shows our intent in retaining these brave men and women in Maryland as neighbors, community members, and heroes. I respectfully urge a favorable report on this enabling legislation, and I thank you for allowing my panel. Thank you.
Next, Mark Cicero for 2 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you, committee, for having me, and thank you for the explanation, Delegate Jones. I just wanted to state that I have submitted 2 written testimonies, one from FLUIA, which is the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association that represents 31,000 federal agents, and the Fraternal Order of Police and the Capitol Police version of the percentage of the Fraternal Order of Police. I also wanted to state something that maybe is not known, is that we are on a fixed income as disabled federal agents. So if we are cleared to work, if the doctor clears us to work and say I want to just do something low impact, like teach at my son's school and substitute teach, I might make $5,000 that year. If I make that $5,000, I will deduct that $5,000 from my salary, which is completely understandable. The problem is if I cannot complete this task year after year, the government continues to reduce that salary for the rest of my life, just because they have proven that I can make that salary one time. And so for that, this would help the financial burden of disabled federal agents and Capitol Police officers. And I'm available for questions.
One more witness, and then there may be some questions. Kevin Canale, who is just hanging out with us today for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate being able to hang out. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 285 with a clarifying amendment. And I'll say right off the bat, I appreciate Delegate Jones speaking with me about this bill. I understand her intent is to make this truly enabling. Our concern is merely technical. We want to make sure that counties who have already implemented a similar property tax credit locally have the option as to whether or not to add a new class of folks onto that property tax credit. So as long as we can just clarify that, we are supportive of the bill. It's another tool in the toolbox for counties to add on to this property tax credit, and we appreciate the delegate bringing it forward. So with that, Madam Chair, MACO requests a favorable report with that technical amendment, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Jones or the two witnesses? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 285. Moving on to House Bill 35, Delegate Plakovich-Carr. And whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Julie Plakovich-Carr here to present House Bill 35. Colleagues, this is legislation to improve the transparency and accountability of procurement decisions in our state's elections. The bill would do two things. First of all, it would clarify the cost share between our state board of elections and our local boards of elections in terms of election-related costs. The current arrangement is generally that's supposed to be a 50-50 cost split. And that was specified in some uncodified language that dates back to 2001. However, that uncodified language is rather vague. Even the Department of Legislative Services have pointed out that the current language is fairly problematic. And we've actually seen in real life where there have been some disputes about who is responsible for paying for what because of this current uncodified language. And a recent example of that was in the 2020 general election, when it was decided at the state level that for the general election, every registered voter should be mailed a application to request a mail-in ballot. So even though that was decided at the state level, the local boards of elections ended up having to pay 100% of the cost of that mailing. So this bill would clarify that cost share and codify that existing 50-50 split between the state and local boards of elections. The second part of the bill has to do with improving transparency of procurement decisions related to our elections. Unfortunately, we have a little bit of a history of where very important or high dollar contracts related to elections are being made at the staff level within the State Board of Elections. And our appointed members of the State Board of Elections are not the ones ultimately who are reviewing or approving those contracts. And an example of that also from the most recent election had to do with the contract for the vendor to print the ballots. Now, there was a last minute change that was needed. The first vendor had dropped out. However, the members of the State Board of Elections, were not notified of the change in vendor and didn't actually review or approve that contract before it was put into place. We do know that sunshine is the best disinfectant when it comes to running good government, and especially in terms of procurement decisions. Having public transparency before those decisions is made is really important. This bill would ensure that information in regards to election procurements is out there publicly, and would also make sure that for high dollar contracts, meaning $50,000 or more, that those decisions are going before the appointed members of the State Board of Elections. Finally, I will note that this is a MACO priority bill for this session, one of 4 bills that they are prioritizing. And I hope that we can certainly act to put some financial guardrails in place and ensure more transparency and clarity around these procurement decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will have Kathleen Boucher for 2 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. Again, Kathleen Boucher with Montgomery County's Office of Intergovernmental Relations, here to testify in support of this bill on behalf of the county. We're grateful to Delegate Plakovich-Carr and to MACO, who has this bill as an initiative. Delegate Plakovich-Carr did a wonderful job of outlining the bill. The county is very supportive of codifying the 50% cost share. It has created some really unnecessary ambiguity and conflict over the years, and very, very important to codify it and clarify its meaning. So the county supports that part of the bill. But also, and perhaps even more importantly, is the public transparency and sunshine that Delegate Plakovich-Carr spoke to. Seems basic from a public policy perspective to the county that significant contracts would be brought to the Board of Elections itself, and that material and relevant information regarding the purpose of those contracts, regarding source of funding, would be shared with the Board of Elections before decisions are made. And similarly, again, a basic from a public policy perspective from the county's view, that the Board of Public Works would have the basic information about purpose of contract, source of funding, and that it would be very, very clear, state responsibilities versus county responsibilities. So the county is again grateful that the bill is presented to you, and would respectfully request that the committee give the bill a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kevin Canale for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canale here in strong support of House Bill 35. This bill does address a legislative initiative for Maryland's 23 counties and Baltimore City. And you have my written testimony. I'll add some quick points. This bill is really about fairness and certainty. You've heard a lot about what the bill does, and I think the bill sponsor and Ms. Boucher did a great job walking through the bill. So I want to focus on something that happened over the interim that exemplifies why this bill is so important. And I'm talking about poll books. They're what we use to check in people at the polls. They need an upgrade. There's no doubt about it. The fiscal note points out that the poll books are now a 50-50 cost split, and that is due to a recent policy decision. And I just want to put that into context. Because of the ambiguity you've heard about from Delegate Polakovich-Carr about who pays for what, and the counties and the states, some stuff is 50-50, some stuff isn't. There was some ambiguity on the poll book project, and the state decided that counties should pay almost all of the costs for poll books, for these new poll books, and that's almost $27 million. MACO and Mayo, the Maryland Association of Election Officials, believe that that should absolutely be a 50-50 cost split. And we actually went to the Board of Public Works to make our case. The Board of Public Works agreed with us, and the state has now agreed to pay 50% of the cost to replace the poll books. That's a great outcome from a county government perspective, but the point of the story is that that shouldn't have to happen, right? We shouldn't have ambiguity in how we fund elections. In simple terms, when it comes to elections, if the state mandates that local boards use a particular system or equipment, and if it's the state that oversees the procurement of those systems and equipment, and if it's the state that actually chooses the vendor to supply those systems or equipment, then the state should have skin in the game and pay 50% of the costs. Fair is fair. We're not asking the state to pay all of the costs, but we believe 50% is fair and reasonable, especially because under current law, the only role the county governments play in that process is paying the bill. So by clarifying and codifying this 20-year-old precedent and properly defining the equipment and systems that are subject to a 50-50 cost split, the bill delivers stability and predictability for state and local budgets. MECO also wants to improve communications between the State Board of Elections and county governments, especially when the state is to making decisions that oblige county funds. We just want county governments to be in the loop so that they can plan accordingly. House Bill 35 delivers necessarily and
Allie, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. I allotted you a little time because on all the other bills, you were like way ahead of the curve.
It's okay. I'm usually brief. So we believe that this bill provides necessarily timely policy changes that balance the shared goals of providing fair, open, and transparent elections, and we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Questions? I'll just remind everyone that Jared Demarinis and Mary Wagner are here too, and I see Delegate Wilkins has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for Delegate Polakovich-Carr. Appreciate you bringing this bill to help provide some clarity. I have some questions about the cost sharing aspect. I just wanted to drill down a little bit more around what under your bill, which specific clarifications would be made. The fiscal note talks about the cost of the MD voters, which currently is 100% on the county. So that's a very specific item that would then be 50-50. What other pieces of specific goods and services are we lacking clarity that this bill, if there are any, that this bill would clarify? So we can drill down a little bit more, that'd be helpful.
Thank you for the question. And actually, I would defer to Mr. Canale to provide the details on that.
Thank you, Delegate Polakovich-Carr and Delegate Wilkins. It's a great question. I think the only thing left is Maryland voters, right? So now that we've taken care of the poll books and the Board of Public Works has agreed that that should be a 50-50 cost split, the only thing out there that the state is mandating and choosing the vendor for and is high dollar is Maryland voters in that system. So that would be the effect of this bill, would say the state has made this decision and the state should pay 50% of the costs. I think we're there with everything else. So really, I think that's the only thing this bill loops in at this point. And then anything in the future, right? So we don't know what technologies are going to come forth down the line. And I think if we can just say, codify this language and make sure that, again, these high dollar contracts that the state is choosing the vendor for, the state is mandating that we use, we just think the state should have some skin in the game, and they're making all the decisions. Right now, it's just empty voters, but down the line, it could be something else that we haven't even contemplated yet.
Okay, I appreciate that. And so on the point of something that we haven't contemplated yet, the other question I have is that the language of the bill, and maybe I'm making a distinction where one isn't needed, but the language of the bill talks about SBE mandating items versus local jurisdictions electing or voluntarily doing certain things, and the cost sharing is different for those two things. What about items not contemplated yet, potentially, that the state mandates, as in the legislature says, I don't know, let's say something comes up this election season, we say, you know what, we really need to ensure that we have this item. And so it's being mandated by the legislature, not by SBE, since the bill talks specifically about SBE versus non-SBE versus the locals electing to do something. How would something like that be addressed?
I think that's a great point, and actually a point where we should be tightening up the language in the bill, because the goal here really is to future-proof things, to make things clear now and for the future. So, I'm happy to amend the bill to address that as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 35. Thank you. Moving on to House Bill 203, Delegate Attar. Whenever you're ready, and there's one witness after you, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. House Bill 203 is a bill aimed at helping homeowners struggling with property taxes. While discussing constituent issues with property taxes and the homestead property tax credit with SDAT, I found out that there are many homeowners in tax sale who have not applied for the Maryland homestead tax credit. So this credit is currently not retroactive. This bill would change that and allow those who are eligible to retroactively get the credit. It requires SDAT to then retroactively grant the homestead property tax credit for the prior taxable year when receiving an application from the homeowner, if that homeowner is determined to be eligible for the credit. Now, SDAT filed this identical bill in the Senate, and it was given a favorable report already. I therefore ask for a favorable report on House Bill 203, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. We have William Steinwittle here. So Mr. Steinwittle, for 2 minutes, please.
Hi, my name is William Steinwittle. I work at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau. I'm a staff attorney in the Foreclosure Legal Assistance Project. At the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau supports a favorable report on House Bill 203. Our experiences with the property tax credit is that a lot of the eligible people tend to be older and less or not well educated in the process, so they don't realize that they're eligible for the credit, and then they lose the ability to get it. By supporting this bill, this would allow more people to get the credit and would allow them to get retroactive credits without having to submit an application for that year. We had one client who was pushed into a tax sale simply because she didn't apply for her property tax credits. Once she did apply for her property tax credits, the entire default in that was eliminated. So the taxes, but she's still in litigation, and that was mainly because of the lack of the ability to get tax credit. It would also save time in processing the retroactive property tax credits. SDAT has to process all the applications, including the ones for retroactive years, which seniors over 70 years old are eligible for. So by doing this would simplify the process and would make sure that people get the tax credits that they're entitled to. I would also prevent legal hardships for homeowners in Maryland that raise costs and cause serious consequences, such as foreclosure if this was a reverse mortgage or tax sale. So again, Maryland Legal Aid issues a favorable report on House Bill 203.
Thank you. And questions? First question from Delegate Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Delegate Attar, thank you for the bill. Do we have an idea of how many people would retroactively be granted a homestead property tax credit?
Thank you for the question. I don't know that answer, and I don't believe it was touched upon in the fiscal note, but I can look it up and get back to you with that.
Yeah, my concern is just the number of people that would retroactively be granted a property tax credit and the cost. Do we have any idea what the fiscal note would be to that?
Yeah, so the fiscal note says a local effect. It's a revenue decrease by a minimal amount. It said it's a local expenditure and not affected, and the state effect is also a minimal amount. That's what the fiscal note says.
Okay, but we don't know what that minimal amount is.
No.
And then lastly, do we have is there a age requirement for those that are retroactively or a salary requirement? Because your bill didn't speak to either.
No, that's not addressed in this bill. Okay. No, but I wouldn't mind discussing that and addressing that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 203. Delegate Attar, stay in your seat because you're up again. House Bill 36. You're our last two bills. So House Bill 36, and whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this changes the topic a little bit. Madam Chair, and colleagues, we're here to ensure we're doing right by all Marylanders and our policies are fair for everyone. And I believe we're doing a great job doing this. But I also know that when we find areas that this is not the case, it is our duty to ensure we are amending our policy to be in line with this. And that's why I'm back in front of you with House Bill 36, Vehicle Excise Tax, Leased Vehicles. Currently, Maryland is one of only 6 states in our country that taxes our consumers for car leases based on the full price of the vehicle. Maryland, Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas, Vermont, and Virginia. So for anyone who may not be familiar with this topic, I'll explain a little bit more. Let's say I go lease a vehicle. That's like a long-term rental of a vehicle. In any of these 6 states, let's say the car is worth $30,000. If I purchased the vehicle that day, I would pay $30,000 and I would pay taxes on $30,000. If let's say it costs me $14,000 to lease that same vehicle over 3 years, in Maryland, I would still pay taxes on $30,000, even though I'm only paying $14,000 to lease the vehicle and I'm returning the vehicle. So in terms of tax policy fairness, why are we taxing our consumers on an amount that they are not paying? So for example, if I purchase a pair of shoes for $20 that are on sale, but the full retail price is $50, I'm only paying taxes on $20 because that is the amount that I'm paying. So this is not a fair policy, and Maryland should align with the majority of states who tax car leases fairly. Now, what's the problem? Why is this bill being filed again now 2 years in a row and the policy is still the same? The fiscal note. So there's a high fiscal note, and many of us, including myself, do not want to see less money going to our transportation fund. Taxes are a necessity for our state to operate appropriately in the best way for all Marylanders, but we must make sure those taxes are fair. If we pass this bill this year, I put a 5-year delay. It does not go into effect until 2027, and that's to give us sufficient time to ensure we're finding other ways to fund the transportation fund. I also want to point out that the fiscal note specifically says that the estimated fiscal impact of the bill will likely be less than estimated due to additional factors, and it lists those additional factors. So the amount that it lists is actually higher than the actual amount. So colleagues, I ask that you give me a favorable report on this bill, and I ask that we change this policy to be in line with the majority of states. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Franz Schneiderman for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair Atterbury, for the opportunity to address this bill. My name's Franz Schneiderman. I'm with Consumer Auto. We work for safety, fairness, transparency, and affordable transportation for Maryland car buyers and drivers. So happy to support HB 36 because we think it's a question of tax fairness and affordable transportation, and this bill, promotes both of those things. I mean, fundamentally, in Maryland today, if you lease a car, you're taxed on 6% of the full value of the car as if you had bought the whole car. But of course, you haven't bought the car. You don't own that asset. So taxing you as if you owned that whole asset and as if you had made that full purchase just fundamentally seems unfair. As Delegate Attar pointed out, most states have found that it's unfair. and only 6 states tax leases the way we do. 32 states, as I understand it, tax them approximately the way you would under this bill. 6 states don't tax vehicle leases at all. It's a substantial issue for a significant number of Marylanders. DLS calculates that about 47,000 Marylanders a year are paying this tax and paying more than they really barely ought to under this tax. So yes, changing it would cost the state some revenue, but it would be fair to these Marylanders. As is well known, access to automobile transportation is important for economic and other opportunities for families around the state. But the cost of car ownership is an important barrier, and that cost keeps going up as new and used cars are reaching record high prices. Insurance is more than $1,800 a year on average. This would be a way to cut, at least to a small but significant degree for some people, the cost of vehicle ownership and make it easier for people to have access to a quality, safer car. So we support HB 36 and hope you'll give it a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Lou Cohen, please, for 2 minutes. You're on mute, Mr. Cohen. Mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you. Maryland currently imposes a 6% tax, as it's been said, on the full purchase price of the vehicle. This is in spite of the fact that the lessee will only have the vehicle for a portion of the vehicle's useful life. While vehicle leasing has become a preferred method of providing vehicles to consumers, providing a more affordable cost structure, the percentage of leased vehicles in Maryland has severely lagged that of the nation, largely as the result of the tax structure. By way of example, New York and New Jersey have approximately double the percentage of vehicles being leased that they have in Maryland. Pennsylvania, by way of example, has 35% greater penetration of vehicles on lease than does Maryland. Approximately half of the vehicles, 55% of vehicles leased, are replaced every 3 years with a new lease, as opposed to 5 or 6 or 7 years on vehicles that are owned, enabling those leasing to enjoy reduced maintenance costs as the vehicles are turned over at or near the end of the manufacturer's warranty. The current taxing method places an unfair tax burden on the consumers. I won't go into all of the numbers there, but the cost of leasing a vehicle in Maryland requires, for example, on a $50,000 car, $3,000 up front, or that customer would pay $100 more per month than would someone in a neighboring state to cover that tax. Other states impose a tax on the monthly rental. In other words, they're taxing that portion of the vehicle's useful life that the lessee will have the vehicle, as opposed to Maryland's on the full purchase price. The differential.
Mr. Cohen, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your testimony.
To wrap up the testimony, I would have to go over some additional notes, but I can end it here. The only suggestion I would have is the bill as written provides 5 years before it goes into effect due to the fiscal notes, which seem to be somewhat incorrect by way of my calculations, because they would collect tax to offset that on the approximately 30% of the vehicles that are purchased by the customer at the end of the lease, based upon the purchase price that they're paying for the vehicle. Thank you. Hello?
Everyone froze. So did you wrap up? I didn't hear you. Everything froze. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the bill sponsor or the panel? Seeing none,
Chair.
back
Madam Chair, I have a question, sorry.
Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize, did Mr. Kitzmiller go?
No, you're right. So let's hold the questions. Mr. Kitzmiller.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Peter Kitzmiller. I'm the president of the Maryland Automobile Dealers Association. We represent 300 franchised new car and truck dealers across the state of Maryland here today in support of House Bill 36. I think Delegate Attar did a very good job of explaining the unfairness of this tax. I'm going to focus on a totally different issue, and that is the impact that I think leasing is going to have on the adoption of electric vehicles. Starting this year, I think it's a critical time in Maryland and across the country on accelerating as quickly as possible the adoption of electric vehicles. Everybody wants to see that. For the first time, we're going to have vehicles available across all model lines. We're going to have pickups, SUVs, all fully electric. And so this is the time to do the most we can to help people with these vehicles. And there are a number of concerns, but two major concerns for consumers when it comes to making a decision on purchasing or leasing an electric vehicle. Number one is the cost. Electric vehicles currently are significantly more expensive than their internal combustion counterparts. They've come down in price. That's going to continue to get better, but right now they are still significantly more expensive. Most of them are in excess of $50,000, even for the least expensive electric vehicle. And cost is something that leasing does a very good job of addressing. Most people look at monthly payments. Leasing is a good way to address that when the cost is an issue. So I think this unfair taxing of leases in Maryland is going to be an impediment when someone starts looking at an electric vehicle. The second issue with electric vehicles is it going to work for me as a consumer? Am I going to be concerned about range, whatever those things are? And in making that decision, one of the concerns I may have is, what am I going to do if this deal doesn't work for me? Am I going to be stuck with it? Again, leasing addresses that. You do a 3-year lease. If it doesn't work the way you want it to work, if it's not doing what you need, the vehicle's not doing what you need it to do, you have the absolute ability just to walk away from that vehicle, and you have no obligation. You don't have to worry about disposing of it. I think most people are going to find electric vehicles work very, very well for them. But leasing, I think, is going to be a critical component of getting more and more people to adopt electric vehicles. So for those reasons, for a favorable report.
Now we'll have questions. Delegate Lukey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Kitzmiller, I think you're probably the best person to ask my questions of, and I'm extremely sympathetic to Delegate Attar's argument here. I think she's got the right end of the stick in terms of the unfairness of this. But walk me through a little bit. Under current law, if I'm purchasing a vehicle, I negotiate a price at a dealership, I pay 6% on the purchase price of that vehicle, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So under a leased vehicle, under current law, I'm paying 6% of, the law says the retail price. Is that the MSRP, or what am I paying 6% on?
No, that's a good question. It's the same price. It's whatever you agreed to with regards to the lease. It's not necessarily the sticker price. It could be the same price as that was when you bought the car. Okay. So you're paying tax on the fair market value of the car that you agreed to with the dealer.
Okay. So if I lease a car, if I go out today under current law and I lease a vehicle, I'm paying 6% on that retail price up front. What do I pay? Correct. What do I pay when, let's say I buy out the lease? Do I pay, I'm not paying twice, right?
So that's again, very good question. So I think, and I could be getting the timing wrong. I think it was 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, under the law in Maryland forever, which is one of the reasons why our leasing penetration is so low, you did have to pay. If you bought the car at the end of the lease and actually bought it, you had to pay. At the time, it was 5% excise tax, but you had to pay the excise tax. I believe 9 years ago, the General Assembly changed out buying the vehicle at the end of your lease. You do not pay any excise tax. That is the one time when you transfer. So the title is going to be transferred from the leasing company to you, the customer, Delegate Lukey. That's usually whenever the title's transferred, that triggers a 6% tax. This is an exception. The current law, there's an exception to that, and you do not pay the 6%. Now, this bill, as I read it, eliminates that. you would in fact, if you bought it at the end of the lease, you would have then in fact have to pay the 6% at the end of the lease.
Okay, so under this bill, I go get a lease. I'm paying 6% on the price and the capitalized cost reduction, the price of the lease now, the lease payments and the capitalized cost reduction. And then if I decide to buy out the lease, I'm paying 6% on the buyout price as if I were buying a used vehicle at that point.
Correct. The exemption that currently exists would go away.
Okay. But, you know, if I'm a dealer leasing in Maryland, I've now, if my customer doesn't buy out the lease, first of all, they're probably getting a new lease or purchasing a vehicle, but then I've got an extra vehicle. How does that work? Does that then vehicle ends up on my lot and I can sell it as a used vehicle, or what happens from there?
It depends, and it's changing, you know, because of the chip shortage, it's changing a lot. Normally, if I'm the dealer, I probably would get the first shot at keeping that vehicle in my used vehicle inventory. I would simply put it on the lot as a used car. And because remember, technically that vehicle is owned by the leasing company, BMW Financial or Honda Credit or whatever. But normally where you take the vehicle back, the dealer is going to take that vehicle. If they want to, they're going to take it into their inventory and then resell it as a used car.
So, and maybe this is a conversation for council, then I don't understand the fiscal advice we got from the Department of Transportation and what's in the fiscal note. Because it seems to me all we're doing is we're saying, right now we're taxing you on the retail price when you get the lease, but we're not taxing you on the buyout. But now we're going to be creating a fairer version of the tax on the lease. You get taxed on the buyout or that vehicle. I assume this won't result in a net decrease in used vehicle sales in Maryland. So we'd still get excise tax revenue from the used vehicles.
I agree with you. I will say, and I know you often hear every day people questioning fiscal notes. This one I do not understand. Although I will say they do indicate at the end of the fiscal note that they have not been able to calculate what the benefit would be to the state of no longer having that exemption at the end, because the people who buy their car out at the end of the lease has fluctuated. They indicate it's fluctuated so much over the last 3 years. Now, I'm assuming that's correct. I don't really know, but you're correct. The vehicle, if you don't buy it at the end of the lease, we're going to put it into some Maryland dealer, in all likelihood, is going to put that vehicle in their inventory and they're going to sell it to a customer. And then there's going to be 6% paid on that vehicle.
So we recoup the revenue. Yeah, I mean, I think my read is the fiscal note writer, the testimony we got from MDOT is similar to what the fiscal note writer included. So I think they were relying on that to some extent, but I think we need to dig into that a little more. Thank you, Mr. Kitzmiller. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make sure I understand the piece of the bill that I'm particularly interested in. And Delegate, thank you so much for bringing this bill. I think this really is truly about tax fairness. But to make sure I understand, the retail value of the car, $40,000, for example, right? But for someone who leases the car, they're paying the depreciation. So let's say they're paying out the $20,000 of, let's say it's leased for 3 years or so, and they're paying that out. What this bill is saying is that you're not paying the $40,000 in the 6% sale tax. You would pay the $20,000, which is what the buyer has agreed to in terms of depreciation, what their monthly payment is actually attached to. Is that correct?
Yes, you're paying the sales tax on the actual price that you're paying for the vehicle.
Okay, I think this makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that clarification. I think I want to associate myself with the confusion and questions of the majority leader as well on that other piece of the bill. So thank you.
Thank you for the question, Delegate.
Other questions for Delegate Attar or any of the other witnesses? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 36. And Delegate Attar has our final bill of the day, House Bill 204. Delegate Attar, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. This is a homeowner's property tax credit. It's the application filing deadline is extended. So House Bill 204 is another bill that's also aimed at helping homeowners struggling with property taxes. And throughout the interim, I had constituents, primarily elderly constituents, coming to me for assistance with missing the tax credit deadline. A lot of times it had to do with all the paperwork that needed to be submitted, issues with the internet and doing it online. And after speaking with SDOT, I found out that this is a problem for many Marylanders. This bill waives the application deadline for first-time applicants and for those who have filed a timely application for the credit for the 3 immediately preceding taxable years. It would authorize SDOT to accept these applications. SDOT filed this identical bill in the Senate as well, and it was given a favorable report there. I asked for a favorable report in House Bill 204. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Kimberly Schneider for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today in favor of House Bill 204. My name is Kimberly Snyder, and I am a social work intern at the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. MCRC is a statewide coalition of individuals and organizations that advances economic rights and financial inclusion for Maryland consumers through research, education, direct service, and organizing and advocacy. You have my written testimony, but today I wanted to speak on my personal experience as a social work intern. I've spent much of my time at MCRC working with the SOAR program, which stands for Securing Older Adult Resources. Many of our clients are referred to us by other agencies, and usually when they are in dire financial need. I've personally worked with several clients who were referred to us after the homeowner's tax credit deadline had already passed. Even though they would have qualified for the program, they could not apply until the next year, despite their financial need. These clients were all over 60 years old and disabled and on fixed incomes. All of them owned their homes outright, and having worked to pay off their mortgages, their homes were their only wealth. So House Bill 204 will enable more vulnerable Marylanders to gain access to this great program, which will help them keep their homes and age in place. Thank you, and I urge a favorable report.
Next, Louise Carwell, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Louise Carwell, and I'm the Senior Attorney for Consumer Law and Maryland Legal Aid. Maryland Legal Aid sees many elderly and disabled homeowners who would benefit from the homeowner's property tax credit and do. And often we see that they have missed the deadline to apply, either because they have forgotten or because, as Delegate Attar alluded to, the paperwork is simply a little bit too cumbersome for them to be able to gather the supporting documentation and to submit it on time. The initial application is not that difficult, but everything that needs to support it is sometimes just too difficult for them to get, and they simply miss that deadline. And there are individuals who we encounter who come to us close to tax sale or in tax sale who could certainly benefit if they had applied for the property tax credit. It's for that reason that this bill would really assist those individuals to stabilize their ability to remain in their home, and Maryland Legal Aid urges a favorable report on House Bill 204.
Thank you. And we have Jade McClary for 2 minutes, please. Jade McClary. Okay, are there any questions for the bill sponsor or the 2 witnesses? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 204. And that concludes the testimony and bill hearings today for the Ways and Means Committee. For the back Zoom folks, I will see you all at 2:45 on a new